Let's dial in some classic sounds with the Synergy 2CP module. This is, of course, based on the iconic Boogie 2C Plus amplifier. If you're familiar with bands like Metallica, Dream Theater, or even Stryper, you'd be very familiar with the sound of the 2C Plus and Mark Series amplifiers in general. They're beloved by people who play hard and heavy high gain styles because you get an immense amount of distortion that is very tight and controlled with lots of fine adjustments available on there. The bass, middle, and treble controls on this preamp, unlike a lot of other high gain designs, are actually placed before the main distortion stages, meaning you can use the bass control like a tight control, and you can use the treble and mid-range controls on there to basically act as secondary gain controls, which is why I'd recommend to so many people who encounter one of these in the wild to start with these maybe rather unusual settings. I've got the treble control all the way up and the bass control all the way down. I don't have much mid-range on there, and there's two gain controls on here. You have basically the channel 1 volume, and then you've got a lead channel volume on there. They work in concert to give you that cascaded gain tone on there. I've started with basically gain 1 at around noon, and I've got the lead drive up a little bit higher on there. Once you've got your kind of desired gain texture on there, you use the 5-band graphic EQ to sculpt that. So if I have the EQ out of the circuit, I have this kind of mid-range, heavy, distorted tone that would work great as a classic rock tone. You can hear kicking in that kind of V-shaped style EQ where I've cut a lot of the mid-range frequencies and boosted the extreme frequencies. Immediately takes it from more of a classic rock sound into that classic scooped thrash tone. That's such a great starting point. And like I said earlier, the bass control on there is basically your tight control. If you want a little bit more give and a little bit more sponginess to the tone, you can turn the bass up. If you want a little less fizz and sizzle, you can turn that treble control down. Just keep in mind the treble control is acting like a secondary gain control on there. I'll give you an example. Of course, the speaker pairing that you're using is going to make a huge difference on here. I'm rolling with greenback, so it does have a little bit more of that classic feel to it, but that's the inner logic to get that classic tone where you keep the bass control low, that's going to keep the distortion tight, but then you add in a whole bunch of low end on there. And you want to voice this to the cab and mic selection you're using when you're recording. I can bring that up and get even more of that kind of sub bass thing. The 240 Hertz slider, this to me will take you from more of a Metallica thing if you keep it low to more of a Dream Theater thing. It's got a very woody tone about it. And if you think about that classic Petrucci sound, there's more of that like low mid in there, whereas the Metallica thing is just full on scooped. So what I will do is bring up the low 80 Hertz slider and you'll hear this sub bass thing enter the equation. Then I'll take the 240 even lower. That's going to sound super scooped. And then I'll bring it back up for more of that woody tone. keeping that middle slider all the way down is going to keep things super scooped. You would have noticed I turned the bright switch on there as well. Bring the 240 hertz slider up, kicking on the bright is just going to add that little bit of extra clarity and aggression in there. The final slider on there, the 6600 hertz slider, basically that to me is like your secondary presence control, or someone like John Petrucci would call that your mastering control. That is going to control the overall brightness, and that really depends on the speakers you're using. If you were running this with, say, a 1x12 EV loaded cab, you could crank that up. If you were using vintage 30s, you might want to have that a little bit lower on there. Bringing up that 750 hertz slider more to that kind of neutral middle position on there, to me, takes you from more of your kind of thrash or prog metal sound into more of your, like, say, 80s hair metal territory. And this is where the lead shift, or as I call it, the fat switch, comes into play. That's going to change the mid-range voicing on there. So we're bringing up the 750 hertz slider, so there's more mids in general. Then I will kick this in, and this will really thicken things up. Shift just makes everything juicier sounding, and it makes everything a little more forgiving under the fingers on there. Those kind of Metallica style settings that we started out with are really, really unforgiving, where I had these two switches off. I actually didn't have that much gain going on there, but the overall tightness and scoopness of the tone gave it that heaviness in there. Whereas here we've got a lot more mid-range going on, both into the front of the main gain stages and then afterwards on there, which is kind of why it gives you more of that kind of hair metal, 80s metal thing. Probably my favorite combo on here is actually turning the mid-range control up a little bit, going really high with the treble, a little lower with the bass on there. I don't like a lot of the 240 hertz slider on there, but I'd still have it higher than if I was going for those Metallica style settings on there. If I've got the EQ out and these two switches out, I get this. Awesome for rhythm work, but it's also still really thick sounding for lead work on the Les Paul. Switching over to a Strat with a humbucker in the bridge and adding a little bit of pitch detune and a little bit of stereo delay in post, this can get you that like kind of Steve Lukather style 80s lead sound, especially with the fat switch on. With a Strat, I actually like to turn the mid-range control up above noon on here, which I wouldn't normally do if I was going for more of the thrash or prog thing. pretty glorious. We've talked about the lead channel the whole time so far, so let's switch over to the clean sound. I'm going to leave that detune and delay on in my DAW. I'm going to go to the clean channel on here. You can kind of treat this like a black panel Fender amp on here, where I'm going to run the volume 1 at around noon. I've turned the presence control up to get some more sparkle out of it. I don't have the EQ on for the clean channel. This has a really cool auto switch for the G EQ, where you can have the graphic EQ always on, always off, or on only on the lead channel, but off on this first channel. So I'm leaving it off on here. This is going to give us a nice big fat Fender style clean, and I can bring the shift or the bright switch in on there. I'm using the tapped bridge humbucker and the middle pickup together here. It's a really lovely, lush, crystalline clean, especially with those time-based effects. If I turn the delay off, but just leave the stereo detune on, then I bring in the graphic EQ on the clean channel. It sounds even more sparkly and spanky. And then last but not least, if we're still on the Strat, I'm using the neck and middle position. I've just taken those settings that I had dialed in for the clean mode, and I've gone over to the lead channel. If you keep the gain for the lead channel or the lead drive below noon, you get this kind of rootsy, almost Fender style tone out of it. And of course, you can use your guitar volume and tone controls to clean that up and control some of the chaos that's happening on there. Let me know your thoughts on these sounds in the comments section below. And also let me know what your favorite Synergy module is. If you'd like me to do a similar video with some other Synergy modules, let me know which ones, let me know which styles you'd like me to cover in the comment section below. And if you dig what I'm doing here on the channel, links to the music that I make with my band Ragdoll and my Patreon are in the video description. Go and make some glorious guitar noises, and I'll see you on the next one.